finally made myself a sketch easel so I can go outside and paint plein air for hours at a time in absolute comfort with everything that I need at my fingertips. Having been obsessed with this new wave pochard box, which is outrageously expensive, I found myself down a rabbit hole on YouTube and therefore discovered James Gurney, the genius that he is, has of course made his own version. Numerous creators took this idea and made it their own, and there's plenty of videos and a Facebook group devoted to it if that's your thing. But if not, and you're extra old school, you can go and buy the DVD from James Gurney's website himself, where he'll walk you through the process from start to finish. I do want to shout out one other creator before I walk you through my process, and that's Julia Harwood. She's put together a really simple video that talks you through how she did her process. Now, she's already made the sketch easel, so it's not a literal walkthrough in that sense, but she gives you so much information that it's really easy to go away and think about how the design might work for you, what changes you might like to make, and how you're going to do it with whatever materials and tools you have available to you right now. Since Plain April this year, I've been making actual plans, drawing up sketches, and testing out ideas to see how I could make my own. I didn't have a plethora of tools available to me, although I am a carpenter's daughter, and my lovely dadums has taught me lots of skills over the years. I've got a small selection of tools and accessories that I had to go and supplement for me to be able to do this project on my own. And I would say, unless you have a wood workshop, this is going to cost a significant amount of money, perhaps not as much as a £200 ready made luxury pochard box, but it is going to cost you some extra pennies. My initial objective was to make it as light as possible so that I didn't mind carrying it in a bag or a backpack wherever I go to draw. And for that reason, I used one of my MDF drawing boards to make up what turned out to be a prototype. Now, it certainly wasn't a finished article, and very quickly, literally within the same day of completing the hinges, they had started to pull through the board, loosen, and it was going to be completely unusable. The good thing was it was a practice run and it used materials that I had available to me anyway. I can still use those bits of board for drawing on. And I could reuse my hinges. So I hadn't actually lost anything other than my time. As it was me and my dad who did the renovation of our house about 4 years ago and made the studio I'm sat in today, I had some materials like some offcuts of timber that I could use already. I did have some 18 mil thick plywood, and I thought about for a long time whether I could make that work as a sketch easel. If you look at the original pochard that I was talking about, the Yugo New Wave one, that is actually quite close to 18 mils thick, but they have routed out areas to make it much lighter without reducing the structural integrity. Now, I don't have a router and I certainly don't have the skills to use that sort of machine. So instead, I took myself to B&Q and purchased a small sheet of 9 mil thick birch plywood, which I made my finished sketch easel out of in the end. Despite making a few boo boos along the way and having to go out and buy different screw sizes and things like that, I managed to successfully complete this project. So we're going to switch back to Jodie of the past, and she's going to show you exactly what she did to make her own sketch easel. This is 9 mil thick plywood, so it's almost 1 centimetre. It's much stronger because of the layering. With plywood, you have very thin sheets stacked up with the long grain going at right angles to each other for each of the layers. So it's a lot more strong than the basically compacted cardboard that MDF is. So we're going to have a go at making our sketch easel using this bad boy. Before I start though, with the original concept, my plan was to have it 340 millimeters, so 34 centimeters. This is just short, by 230. Again, it's just short. So they were my ideal measurements before I started chopping into this MDF. And now I'm looking at it, and if we pop this on my plywood, that is a width of 405 millimeters, so 14.5 centimeters. And I'm thinking, for the sake of having 3 finished edges and just 1 cut edge, which I can put at the back where the hinges go, what I might just do is cut the full width of this board twice, and make it, I think I worked it out that I needed it 25 centimeters, 250 millimeters, in order to leave room for both this end piece to stop things sliding off the panel and also to give room for the hinges to be applied because they do take up a little bit of space, especially if you give room to put washers on the back for added strengthening. So I'm going to mark up this piece of wood, take it outside with my circular saw, and see how quickly my husband comes running when he hears me powering up a power tool, because I am pathologically clumsy, if not frankly dyspraxic. And there's a high likelihood there will be bloodshed. So I'll see you in a minute. Now, this is where I have to say, don't do what I do and do what I say instead, and get yourself a solid workbench and some decent clamps. I did this process using the end of my rockery as my workbench because I simply don't have one, and it was incredibly difficult to get it to stay where I wanted to cut in a straight line, and quite frankly, be safe. So don't be me, don't do this, do it on a workbench. Another good reason to do that was that there was simply no room to get my machine along the edge of the wood by the edge of my rockery. So learn from my stupidity and please don't do this at home. Once I had both halves cut, I took my piece of beading, which is what I believe this piece of timber is. It's simply a piece of pine that we had used to finish the worktops in my studios. So I had a small length of that over. And what I did was cut it to match the length of both of these boards so that I would have a rim for my materials to lean against, and also to allow for the depth of the hinges when it came to closing both halves of the easel. But you'll see that later. Before I do that though, I do need to sand down all the cut edges to make sure that they're nice and smooth and that there's no splinters. And to do this, I'm using a 60 grit sandpaper. It's really quite rough, and you use in the first instance to smoothen down those edges, and then you come in with a higher number, so in this case a P150 sandpaper, just to finish it off so that it has a nice fine edge when we come to finish the easel. What you see me working on back in my studio is a small block of that 9mm thick plywood. And the reason that I have this extra piece is because where you put the connector that allows you to screw it into the head of your tripod, you want a bit more thickness so that it's strong enough to resist the torsion forces. I'm using a paddle spade bit which matches the diameter of my T-nut, that attachment for the tripod head, to make a hole big enough to hammer it into. As I needed some form of adhesive to give a stronger bond between this base plate and the bottom side of my easel, as well as attaching that little bar you saw me cutting earlier, I'm using something called CT1. It's a quite thick putty-like substance that dries really well, even in damp environments, and has a nice strong bond. You could absolutely use wood glue, but I was too cheap to go out and buy any. You'll notice that in addition to cutting a hole for the T-nut in that spare piece of wood, I've cut the same hole in the bottom of my sketch easel. Now, the reason for that is that the T-nut has a shank which is a little bit longer than the 9mm thick plywood I'm using. So by recessing the head of the nut into the base of the sketch easel and locking these two pieces together with a nice strong adhesive, we're giving it plenty of strength where the most twisting force is going to be applied. And that's where you screw in the base plate that connects your easel to your tripod. Now, I wanted to make sure that that base plate was connected nice and firmly. So what I'm using here is actually a book press. Now, one of my other many hobbies is making my own sketchbooks. So I use this when I'm gluing various components of the book together. It's actually working as a vise. And what I've done is take a scrap piece of plywood, put it over the area where that T-nut and extra base plate are, and then wedged it in and tightened the clamps so that it applies a nice even pressure. I didn't want it to damage the surface of my book press because I need that to be pristine for when I'm making books. But a normal person who has access to a few more tools than I do would use a workbench and some heavy duty clamps. I left this overnight and then it was nice and strong and I was able to continue with the project. The next step the next day was installing the hinges. Now, these are special torque or tension hinges, and they allow you to open up the both halves of your easel to whatever angle you like. They're very, very stiff, and they have a separate screw that you can turn to either loosen or tighten this as you need to. Once those hinges have been marked up, I'm using a smaller diameter pilot hole to make sure that when I put the screws in and tighten them, the wood doesn't splinter and have an uneven, rough finish. And in case you were wondering, yes, I did drill through my block of wood and drill into the desktop. Oopsie! As the hinges didn't come with any screws or washers or nuts, I had to purchase them separately, and I did end up buying 2 lots of each because I got the wrong ones in the first place. You're going to want one that is matching the diameter of the hole in your hinges so that it's nice and secure. And the point of using a washer is that it distributes the torsion forces, so that's that twisting force I mentioned before, again over the area of the wood more widely. So as you're opening and closing your easel in day-to-day use, you're not overly stressing the wood and it should last a little bit longer. A small nut on the end will cover up the bit of screw that sticks out the other side once you finish screwing it in and give it a nice smooth finish. So that is why we have both of those. As the screws are only 4 millimeters in diameter, the nuts are really teeny tiny. So as I didn't have a wrench that small, I'm using my pliers to make sure that they're good and tight, but not so tight that the washer is digging into the wood below. Day 3 in the Big Brother house. That's my terrible Geordie accent. I have varnished one side, and I think you can see the difference between the varnished side and the unvarnished side. But it took quite a long time for it to dry, so I'm abandoning putting any more varnish on until I've finished making the actual assembly. I've drilled out some holes to put magnets in so I can clip pallets and whatnot onto it. I only have 6 magnets, so that's why there's only 6 holes, but ideally I would put some more over this side, I think, and I can always do that in the fullness of time. So let's stick those magnets in and see where we go from there. These neodymium magnets are crazy strong, so let's see how these go. That's not bad. I'm not aiming for them to be totally flush. Actually, that's a good point. What have I got? Yeah. I put that in the wrong way. No, that's fine. Oh shit, that wasn't a good idea. Right, okay. Okay, so as you can see, they're not completely flush, and that's because I was using this 25 mm spade drill bit instead of a Forstner drill bit, which is what you would do to get a flat hole without ending up with the holes coming through to the other side. But I don't have that drill bit, and I've already spent quite a lot on the various bits of kit that I needed to get this far. So I decided I don't mind if I get blobs on the back. I'll just wipe this adhesive off and I can sand it down once it's cured and then varnish it, and I won't even be concerned about it. Here I'm attaching the top to the bottom of my sketch easel, and I just wanted to say that it's really important that you mark up the positions of the holes for your hinges very, very accurately. If you don't, you're going to find it difficult to close both sides of the easel together. Right, so I think I've secured my hinges, and this is the very first time I'm going to close them. Ooh, that's really satisfying. Excelente. As you can see, they're really quite bulky hinges, so I'm going to glue a piece like this onto the other side, onto this edge, so that when it closes, it's got like a full stop, and it also helps things from sliding off my palette. So I'll just grab that piece of wood. There we go. And I'm going to need some clamps. I have some small plastic ones here. Once again, we are using good old CT1 adhesive for sticking power. I think once I've got this in situ, I'm going to do my best to leave this alone out in the sun to dry for at least 12 hours, which is what it says it requires for the CT1 to set before I start fiddling with it any further. So I've rounded off the edges with some sandpaper. As you can see, this already had a little bit of a lip. So I'm going to face that inwards. Once it's fully set, I'll use a blade to cut off the excess adhesive rather than trying to smear it out now and cause even more of a mess. Let's see. So I want one there, one there. One there. And one there. Make sure it's all lined up with the edge. Go see if I've got another couple of clamps. I don't seem to have any of those guys left, so let's see if these big old bulldog clips might be a smidge optimistic. Let's see. Oh no, that works. Excellent. Right, we've got room for 2 of them, so wipe the adhesive off. Right, I think that's as good as I'm going to get it. I'm going to take this outside because it's going to be nearly 30 degrees today and let the heat of the sun warm us up and hopefully set it. Fingers crossed. After 24 hours of being clamped up, I removed them and then varnished all the surfaces with a nice satin varnish to protect it and to give it a degree of waterproofing. Look what I made. I made myself a sketch easel. Literally everything you see is made from scratch by me, which I am so proud of. We have a magnetized area for my palette, so that's not moving anywhere. The glue is currently drying underneath where the magnets are, so I can't take that off to show you just yet. I have a space for my acrylic grey palette. Got my palette knife, and I've got a tub of Payne's Grey and a tub of white gouache, and a water pot, obviously a brush. I have my rag clipped to the edge, and this carabiner is attached to a little pouch I have just sewn from little bits of fabric I had left over. And the idea is I'm going to put things like the lid off my water pot, dirty rags, any spare paintbrushes, the lid off of this. I might need to put my mixing charts away. But I've got loads of clips to hold everything. And it's super, super sturdy. I've fixed the quick release plate to the bottom of my tripod. And that's pretty much it. When the sun starts shining again and it stops raining, I shall take this baby outside and show you her working in the great outdoors. Tonight, the weather turned from a heat wave to an absolute torrential downpour for almost 2 weeks. So it took me quite some time to get out and find somewhere to paint. And I chose my beloved Martin Mere, added this beautiful shallow pond of stepping stones that lead you to a meadow and all sorts of other delights. And when I saw it and the fact that there was a bench there ready for me to plonk myself down for a few hours, I was like, sold, this is where I'm going to paint. And I had the most wonderful day. The weather was glorious. There was a little bit of shade from the overhanging trees. And I think I sat for something like 3 hours at my easel and painted this beautiful scene. Should say that I did make one alteration to the easel before I took it out, and that was adding a hole big enough that I could sink in a water pot so that it would be nice and steady. And that's just below that scrap piece of paper you can see on the bottom half of the easel now. But honestly, I was absolutely thrilled with how it functioned. I couldn't have asked for anything more. I had plenty of space to have everything I want out in front of me, and it was just the best experience to be outside in nature and painting. If you too have fancied making your own sketch easel and you've got any questions whatsoever, then let me know down in the comments and perhaps you'd like to watch this video next.